1979 to 1989, the Soviet-Afghan War, Moscow's longest foreign conflict. Forces, ambushes and raids defined the brutal guerrilla war. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Airstrikes and patrols escalated the violence. The conflict left a legacy of devastation. Before Soviet soldiers entered Afghanistan, the country was already experiencing political upheaval. Afghanistan was divided by competing visions of its future: traditional, religious, nationalist, and communist. The war did not suddenly appear in December 1979. Afghanistan's political crisis had been developing for years. For decades, Moscow had developed close military and political ties with Afghanistan. Afghan officers trained in the Soviet Union, while Soviet weapons and advisors became increasingly important to the Afghan armed forces. In 1973, Mohammad Daoud Khan overthrew King Zair Shah and established a republic. Afghanistan entered a new period of political pent uncertainty. In April 1978, communist military officers and the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan seized power. The revolution transformed Afghanistan's political direction and triggered fierce resistance. Nur Muhammad Taraki became the dominant political figure of the new government. But divisions inside the communist leadership quickly became dangerous. Comrades, the revolution is victorious. We establish a new government for the people. We will build a new Afghanistan. In rural Afghanistan, resistance grew. Many Afghans rejected communist rule, while religious, tribal, and nationalist opposition became increasingly organized. In March 1979, Herat erupted in a major uprising. The scale of the rebellion shocked Kabul and alarmed Moscow. Inside the communist government, Taraki and Hafizullah Amin became rivals. Their struggle weakened an already fragile regime. Amin, your ambition endangers the revolution. Taraki, you are the one who is weak. Your actions invite disaster. Amin emerged as the dominant leader. But Moscow increasingly distrusted him and feared the Afghan communist government might collapse. In Moscow, the question became increasingly urgent. Should the Soviet Union intervene directly or allow its Afghan ally to fight alone?
Товарищи, ситуация в Афганистане ухудшается. Да, товарищ Брежнев, но прямая интервенция – это риск. Мы должны укрепить наши южные границы.
Leonid Brezhnev was the Soviet leader when the final decision was made. Moscow feared that losing Afghanistan could damage Soviet influence along its southern border.
The situation is critical. We must act. The military is ready. We cannot allow the insurgency to win. Then it is decided.
By December 1979, Soviet preparations accelerated. Tens of troops were moved toward Afghanistan. On December 24, Soviet forces began entering Afghanistan in large numbers. What Moscow described as assistance to an allied government was becoming a full military intervention. On December 27, Soviet forces carried out the operation that removed Hafizullah Amin. Amin was killed, and Babrak Karmal was installed as the new Afghan leader. Babrak Karmal became the new leader. But installing a government in Kabul was one thing. Controlling Afghanistan was another.
We will build a new Afghanistan with the support of our Soviet friends. We must unite to secure our future.
Across Afghanistan, resistance fighters, known collectively as the Mujahideen, continued the struggle against Soviet forces and the Kabul government. Mujahideen was a broad term covering numerous factions. They were not one unified army. One of the resistance's most famous commanders was Ahmad Shah Massoud. From the Panjshir Valley, he built a formidable resistance network against Soviet and Afghan government forces. The mountains changed the nature of the war. Soviet helicopters gave government forces mobility and firepower, but the resistance knew the terrain. The Soviet contingent included motor rifle troops, airborne units, armored formations, artillery, aviation, and special forces. During the early 1980s, Soviet and Afghan government forces launched operations across major resistance areas. Yet capturing territory was easier than permanently controlling it. The Panjshir Valley became one of the most famous battlefields. Soviet forces repeatedly attacked Massoud's stronghold, but the resistance repeatedly returned. This was not a conventional front line. Fighters could disappear into villages and mountains, then reappear somewhere else. Afghan civilians suffered enormously. Villages were destroyed, agriculture was disrupted, and millions eventually became refugees. Millions of Afghans fled the country during the war, particularly toward Pakistan and Iran. The conflict had become a humanitarian catastrophe. Pakistan became central to the conflict. Refugees crossed its border, while resistance groups used Pakistani territory as an important rear area. The United States increasingly supported Afghan resistance groups as part of the Cold War struggle against Soviet power. Afghanistan became an international battlefield. Pakistan, the United States, Saudi Arabia, China, and others played different roles in supporting the anti-Soviet resistance. Support did not mean every country shared identical goals. The conflict became a convergence of Cold War strategy, regional politics, and Afghan resistance. China also opposed the Soviet intervention. Beijing saw Soviet power in Afghanistan as part of a larger strategic challenge. Foreign assistance gradually gave resistance groups more capable weapons, including shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems that threatened Soviet helicopters.
With these, we can strike their helicopters from the mountains. This changes everything. The skies are no longer theirs.
Soviet helicopter operations had been one of the war's major advantages. As the resistance acquired better anti-aircraft capabilities, that advantage became more difficult to maintain. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became Soviet leader. He inherited a war that had consumed enormous resources without producing a decisive victory.
Товарищи, мы не можем продолжать эту войну. Михаил Сергеевич, ресурсы на исходе. Москва хочет выйти. Готовьте план.
For Soviet soldiers, Afghanistan increasingly became a war of patrols, ambushes, mountain battles, and uncertainty. Moscow was searching for a way to leave without abandoning its allies. In 1986, Babrak Karmal was replaced by Mohammad Najibullah. Moscow increasingly emphasized reconciliation and the possibility of an Afghan political settlement.
ما باید به یک راه حل سیاسی برسیم. این به نفع همه مردم افغانستان است.
Years of diplomacy produced the Geneva Accords. The negotiations aimed to establish non-interference, international guarantees, and a timetable for Soviet withdrawal.
We are ready to proceed with the terms. Pakistan agrees. The United States supports these guarantees.
The Soviet Union accepts the withdrawal timetable. On April 14, 1988, the Geneva Accords were signed. A timetable was established for the withdrawal of Soviet forces. On May 15, 1988, Soviet forces began their withdrawal.
But the war inside Afghanistan was not over.
As Soviet troops departed, Afghan government forces and Mujahideen continued fighting. The foreign army was leaving, but Afghanistan's civil war remained. On February 15, 1989, General Boris Gromov became the public symbol of the final Soviet withdrawal, walking across the Friendship Bridge as the last Soviet troops left Afghanistan. For the Soviet Union, the intervention was over, but Afghanistan remained at war. For many Soviet veterans, Afghanistan did not end when they crossed the border. The memories of the mountains, comrades, and combat followed them home.
The war followed us home.
We are here for you. Papa, you're home.
Yes, but the memories remain.
The Soviet withdrawal came during a period of enormous change. Gorbachev's reforms were transforming Soviet society, while communist governments across Eastern Europe were beginning to collapse. The Soviet withdrawal did not immediately bring down Najibullah's government. Fighting continued for years, and Afghanistan entered another devastating phase of civil war. On December 24, 1979, Soviet forces began enfried was Afghanistan. Benpint, they entered Janhiwali War, sought the Napad Journalism, Cold Rollere regional strategy is something entirely disengfalf, Pete of conflict when the Soviet soldiers finally crossed the bridge home, the enfried was still waiting for Afghanistan.